So we're here to kind of give you guys the basics on the STIP. And there's a lot of things that kind of feed into this. Basically, when you think about it, as Mike were just talking about, the planning process actually feeds into what we're about to talk about. So moving on to the first slide, kind of get things going. And Amanda's going to help clarify things. So STIP amendments. Everybody's favorite thing. And I know that, because I hear about it all the time. So does Amanda, probably more than I do. Biggest thing with STIP amendments, get them figured out as early as you possibly can. There are two other pieces of the puzzle that come into play, and I'm going to have Amanda talk about timelines in just a second, and how many STIP amendments we do right now, which I know David's got a major effort underway to try to figure out how to take what I can't even get my arms wide enough to say how many we're doing down to a better process. So depending on where your project is, we have 10 metropolitan organizations in the state. So if you're one of those lucky ones that gets to deal with a project in those boundaries, good luck, you just added time to your process. Said, not my call, and if you call and go, I need that help, I'm federally bound, it's not my call, it's their call. How many Region 1 people do we have? You guys have it the worst. You guys have Metro, and they add on, they have the most comprehensive process for STIP amendments in the state. A lot more than anybody else, so keep that in mind as you guys are working through your stuff. I mean, it can take literally a MPO 3 to 6 months, depending on what the change is to the STIP, for them to process something. And if you have questions, ask one of your Region 1 colleagues, they'll tell you how painful that is. So then the other part is cost changes that trigger the OTC. Tell you right now, your region managers love these. They like writing letters. They like showing up on the third Thursday every month to tell the commission about a change to the STIP. It's one of their favorite things. So if you really want to do that and get on the good side of them, keep that in mind as well. We do have prescribed information about what triggers the commission if you don't know that. Basically, if your project cost changed by 25% of your total project, or 500,000, whichever is less, you're going to the commission. That is what they've asked. We recognize how many amendments have been triggered by this. Upper management is looking into this and hopefully taking this back to the commission in due time to be able to hopefully expand that a little bit and get us a little bit more freedom within. But until then, we live by the rules that we're given. So therefore, until we're able to figure out how to make that work, that is what it is. So from the commission standpoint, when we see the MPOs, I'll kind of turn it over to Amanda here real quick. Timelines to complete an amendment. Let's go with the timelines first, and then we can talk about the number of amendments.
Okay, so currently the average time from start to finish for an amendment in the current STIP is 39 days. When the amendment is entered into the STIP FP is the start, because we can't track what y'all are doing outside of the STIP. But from when the amendment is entered into the STIP FP to when it is approved by me and considered approved in the project, 39 days. Now that varies. It's generally much longer in Region 1. It's generally about 60 days in Region 1 because of the MPO process, or even longer. And then less in some areas, depending on MPOs. Region 4 and 5 only have one MPO each. It generally doesn't impact their amendment processes at all. Right now we have just over 1,700 projects in the STIP. We have had 1,800 amendments entered into this STIP so far, and we're only in year 2, halfway through year 2. We've had, 1,265 projects have been amended. Now that could be multiples on one project or exactly 1,200 projects. That's a lot of amendments. That's a lot of change management requests, or PCRs, whatever you guys call it. It's a lot of paperwork. So as far as timeline goes, if it's a full amendment, so do you guys know basic STIP rules? Should I touch on that basically? Adding or removing projects from the STIP, increasing your project costs 20, 30, or 50%, depending on the value of the project. Adding scope, taking scope away, those are all full amendments that would trigger federal highway approval. Those require a 2-week public comment period, and so if you're in an MPO, the MPO is required to deliver that public comment period for the project. Otherwise, we deliver it. It's 2-week minimum requirement, and the public comment period goes out on the 1st or the 16th of each month, depending on the month. February is a little different. And after the public comment period, we submit the amendments to Federal Highway or FTA for approval, which can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. So you kind of have to add that cushion. So depending on the timeline of when you get the projects entered or the amendments entered, you could be looking at 39 days to get your project approved. So kind of use your time wisely. Like Jeff said, better early than later to get your amendments entered. If you have questions about amendments, you can certainly come to me. I'd prefer you to come to me than Jeff. If I have questions, I'll go to Jeff. Otherwise, touch base with your STIP coordinator. If you don't know who that is, give me a call, shoot me a Skype, an email. I can help you out. Otherwise, you can look up on the website. Your STIP coordinators are listed on all of the ODOT websites, internal and external.
And your phone number is?
Oh, what's your phone number? It's 986-3534. You can reach me there. I don't like talking on the phone, to be honest, so emails are way better for me.
Project descriptions and information. So the last 2 years, we've been getting, I'll say hounded instead of beat up from FHWA regarding having better titles and project descriptions. I've taken out the project number and the project title, so that way this doesn't shame anybody, because that's not the intent. It's kind of just meant to describe where we're going with this. If you can't read it, because I recognize that this is a little small, the project description reads, pavement preservation, grind out existing surface and inlay, overlay new asphalt. So our new rules are basically stating that the project description needs to be public friendly. And they need to be able to have an understanding of what we're doing. This is a pretty good description that we've been doing. I've been involved in this STIP for 10 plus years. That's what we've been doing for my first 8. We've had to fix that over the last 2. We now need to be have better descriptions on than this. This is more engineering. This is less public friendly. Your STIP coordinators have all the information about what makes that. As I tell everybody, I said we need to be prescriptive but flexible. Picking on the ADA program just because they're very easy. No offense, Billy. ADA ramps between 1st Street and 6th Street. Don't say the number of ramps. We're doing ADA ramp upgrades between 1st and 6th. You might be doing all of them. You might not. That's where we're being very prescriptive, but flexible to allow you to be able to say, you know what? We don't have 4 of them we have to do, so we can take that count from 12 down to 8, whatever that is. Turn lanes. Describe that you're working on left turn crash issues. Don't know whether that's going to be a center turn lane, refuge, whatever. Just put in what the issue is, but also leave it open-ended so that you guys can let the engineering process decide what the right fix is going to be. But you're still telling the public, our problem at this spot has been left turns. What the solution is, that's what the design team is supposed to do and figure out as far as the treatment goes. So keep that prescribed but flexible. As I describe it to the STIP coordinators, be succinct but vague, because you got to kind of keep that going. A couple things in there we cannot do, but we need this. That's what, project description wise, keep it simple. Project names, very simple too. It's US 101 from one spot to, we don't use mile points as much as possible, because mile points people don't know. We try to use landmarks. We recognize on certain things that it is what it is to be able to have to use mile points, because that's all we have out there. So try to figure out a landmark that people in the public are going to know. Store A to store B or whatever that may be, as I'm being a little flippant about that, but you guys I think understand what I'm saying, is pick a landmark that the public knows, and that way we're going off of that. Okay, starting a project. EAs, basically where I'm going. Scoping, I'm going to start there. Because this first checkbox, federal requirement is each phase you have in the STIP is fully funded. I want to repeat that, because this is one of the things we deal with all the time. Each phase needs to be fully funded. So when we have something, we may get asked for a scoping document that says PE is X, right-of-way is Y, construction is Z. We may need that for an audit purpose to show that we're doing that. It's been asked of us before. We don't go, well, we've only got 100,000, but we need 300 for that project. That's okay in the right circumstances, but say the 100,000 was only going to take you to DAP. Funding through DAP for this project. That's okay. We know it's shortchanged at that point because you've picked the milestone that you're able to do. We're saying it's fully funded to that point. Don't say it's fully funded to get us to construction and you know you're only halfway there. Can't do that. Next part, intergovernmental agreements. Who has the fun of IGAs? She gets to review them all. IGAs need to be completed before you can get your EA open. There's a few people in the room that will tell you that I have bent on that depending on the circumstance, and I always will have that caveat that depending on the situation that you are in, I do review the risk of opening up EAs maybe slightly early ahead of the IGA. Now that comes down to a couple things. Who's our partner? We have a handful of partners in this state that aren't very good at doing what they're supposed to do. Very rare do I grant them exceptions. For those of you in Region 1 and Region 2, Washington County is one of the best partners that we have. We get phone calls from them as soon as the IGA has wet ink on their office going, can I send you a check? No joke, we get that as far as getting their deposits in. They are one I usually bend over really quickly because I know they're good for it and they are on the spot to get us what we need. So at the same time, I've also understand IGAs are done, but it's technically not done until it goes to City Council or the County Commissioners. I get that. If we're in a bind, give me a call. Those are circumstances that I can sit there and have the conversation. If we're just waiting for the final rubber stamping of the project, let's get that in. We can get that moving. If it's really going to throw you into your timeline and on the project delivery into a spin cycle. Funding request forms are ready. STIP coordinators, Alex is here, so if you have any questions on what that form looks like and what he needs, fully filled out, everything has to go. Biggest thing I always hear is, well, we requested our EA 2 months ago. You did. I didn't have an IGA. I didn't have this. I didn't have all the information. My staff didn't have all the information. We try to keep track of timelines. Once the request is fully submitted, and I mean fully in all the documents that you need, we keep track. It takes us about 5 business days for us to get it to FHWA. I hear all the time goes, well, we submitted it 2 months ago. You're right, but it doesn't count on our time clock until we have all the documents in place. So right away, environmental certs, the whole 9 on that. Unless we're going MAP 21 process, then we're able to work with you. We work with right away on that all the time. But just keep in mind that this is when all documents are fully together. Once we have all that, timelines. 5 days for my staff to put it into FEMIS. That's the federal system. Usually takes them 5 to 10 business days, normal business, but they do get a little slow sometimes. I'll explain the one time of the year where it gets a little tricky. And then another 5 days for us to get you the EA. So you figure roughly close to a month for that to go through. Biggest delay we always have is the end of August and early September, because that is our busiest time of the year. The feds close down about the 3rd week of September, which means we ask, so any newbies in the room, you're going to have any obligation requests sent to your STIP coordinator for September by the end of August. That has to be submitted so that we can manage the workload. That is our busiest time. Add on an extra week in that time period just because we literally jump by probably about 20% of the volume at that time so that we can obligate funds by the end of the year. Budget. Things happen. You guys go over budget. Fine. Everybody heard the term B code? If you have not, please raise your hand just so I can make sure I know. Perfect. We got a handful of people. B code in our language is over budget. So if you've got $200,000 PE phase and you've spent $250,000, you are $50,000 in B code as we would refer. You'll hear from your STIP coordinators. So this is something that has been brought down on us as far as ensuring compliance. We have 90 days from the date you went over to address that with Federal Highway, or in general, period, on all projects. We have a lot of folks that are trying to follow the rule, but they recognize they're doing a STIP amendment to do the construction phase, update something else. That's great. Unfortunately, I'm going to make you go through a two-step process on that instead of combining them into one. So if we don't meet the 90 days, anything over is non-participating and becomes state cash, and we lose the reimbursement process. So keep in mind the 90 days, which means I produce reports that are given to your STIP coordinators to help facilitate that. You guys have access to your project daily reports, all of that. Please keep an eye on this. This is something that is going to start happening. I'll give you kind of a perspective. Our B codes, we had to start fixing them October of 18. Our B code list at that time was $55 million of projects in B code. 55 mil. We literally had until the end of February to address those. 80% of them were well past the 90-day mark. FHWA Division Office gave us time period to go ahead and address that, recognizing the issues that we have. So the importance behind that, I'm emphasizing that, is that 90 days is the 90-day mark. Please get your stuff in. With it comes a justification as to what caused the increase. You don't have to get too specific. Additional costs for ADA. We had to go out and look at some, geology had to go do some extra digging. Whatever that may be, throw something together pretty quick, and then we're going to need to get that in. When we put it into FEMAS, it goes in as the phase. You may end up with an EA with 4 sub-jobs, just depending on how it's set up. That's a different conversation of what happens on that. But nonetheless, that's by EA, which should equal phase. I would say, from the B code perspective, we're just literally into the first realm of where we got everything cleaned up, so we're not there yet as far as having any potential issues. The next part, when I get into end dates, I'm going to talk about it kind of is in the same alignment. So I'll get to that in a second because we've had some rejections on the EA end date extensions. So I'll walk through that in just a second. Is there any other questions on B codes at this point? Because I do have a Q&A at the end, so if more comes up, all good. So I'll get to that question in just a second. End dates. Okay. When you guys submit your documents, there's a box in the programming request form that says, what's your EA end date? That's the last point of time that you can do work on that project according to your schedule. We have some general business rules which says for PE and right-of-way utilities, general business rule is 6 months after PS&E. Now, we recognize right-of-way. You guys know this well more than we do. Certain projects have a lot more complexities, and you might know you're going into condemnation immediately. Send that sucker out. Don't follow the 6-month rule. Set your date. Set a good date, what you think it will do if you know you're going into condemnation. If you have a really good idea of that, you may not be there yet, but that's okay. If you have a pretty good clue, send it out. We're not going to question a whole lot on that. But those are the general business rules. Construction, if you're dealing with any of the construction side, that's usually 2 years from second note or plant establishment, whichever date is going to be later. Because as you know, you'll open the traffic, but we still got to go plant the trees, flowers, shrubs, whatever we're putting in. That takes more time than because we can have traffic open while doing that. So those are the general business rules, but you guys can adjust that accordingly. What I tell you is FHWA has been very generous with this. However, they're saying just don't be egregious. And they have come back and so really you got a pavement job with a 7-year PE? Yeah, probably, so we bumped it to 4. Still a little bit out there, but you just follow the thought process. They've been very flexible with us on that. Start date, end date extensions. We can end date extend things. That request goes through your STIP coordinator, which will then come to me. We need justification. There's a few justification items that are not allowed. I will kick it back to your STIP coordinator and go, give me something better. I sat on the bill and forgot to do something with it. That's not going to happen. We don't have the resources to complete the project. I'm going to touch on that one in just a second. And 3, we need delays in the project. Additional ADA time. We had a weather event. Contract extension on your, to your consultant. Those are the things I need. We extended the consultant contract. The design team needed more time because we added 5 more ADA ramps. There's a few folks that'll know this one if they're in the rooms. That we've had situations where we've used the same reasoning twice. That's getting pretty minimal about whether they're going to extend that. And we've got other ones we've used weather twice because we had 2 flooding events on one project just recently, and FHWA came back and said no on the second one. Now what happens there is that we don't stop it. We're going to find a way, especially when we're in construction, to be able to allow the contract to get the 3rd note. However, it becomes non-participating from that date forward. So if we end date on 12/31 of 18, let's say that from last year, any work done from 1/1/19 onward is non-participating, not eligible for federal reimbursement. So, and we are starting to see more of those. There's not a ton, but we've done a good job of making sure end dates are buffered. We have the time period in there, and you guys have gotten really good about giving us the right reasoning for us to extend. However, that is a reminder that we have to make sure we have that diligence with that.
Can you explain non-participating?
And you hand me my water, please. So participating versus non-participating is what Amanda's asking me to talk about. Participating means that that charge can be reimbursed from FHWA. Non-participating means it's our dime,
Or
state
the
cash,
local.
or local.
Or the local?
So make sure we're keeping that in the back of your minds. Fully funded. We've had end date extensions come through and go, we need to extend it because we need to add more money. Anytime you're adding money, an end date extension is usually going to go line and line together. That's a good thing. Make sure we have a good reasoning with that though, because we do have to explain what we're adding to the project. So, questions? Anything and everything? We have it written in there that the final engineer's estimate is what holds the 10% marker. So just because Region gave you something that is at $100, but you guys put it at 108, we're now baselining that off 108. And usually we see this on the local side, which means the locals are all of a sudden getting a phone call and they're saying, hey, you owe us more money, because by the time we get there, they've already utilized a lot of their funds in PE or right away, and their federal funds are limited, which means they're paying the overage. So it's a communication thing to make sure you guys are aware of that. It's outside of our hands as far as all that goes. They don't have the authority to do that. We do it on our own projects, stateside as well, multiple times all of a sudden. And I can tell you, when I was up in Region 1 managing my financial plan, I had a couple projects come in and go, why did I get hit for an extra 10%? I didn't have the PS&E or the PAE in the document in my hand and didn't realize that at the time. Learned that at the, talking with Brenda Marcus at the time. She goes, yep, we've got the authority to do it. Just kind of was quiet on the other end. I went, okay, let me mark that down. Regions have a dedicated person on my staff that does all of your programming to get EAs open. They communicate through your STIP coordinator what's going on or what is missing. So expect that to come through your STIP coordinator, because that's what the expectation is. In some regions, STIP coordinator is very good at including the PL on the email traffic, so that way when my staff kicks back and says, I'm missing X, they usually will reply all. So the PL is notified of that at the time of the initial response back. So in most cases, you should be getting it, but that would be coursed through. If you're not hearing from my staff, you need to check in with your STIP coordinator to make sure you're getting what you need from them as far as reverse communication. We can do both in that circumstance, because most of our stuff in FEMAS is going to have both phases, so we can put the end date on both. So even though you're pushing one out, we'll make sure to use whatever the latest is on the whole project as a whole. So even if you're adjusting something just for construction on those type of situations, for those type of contracts, which are very different, we will put both end dates. They'll probably be pretty well aligned, so both phases are together, because that's how they're being delivered, because it's kind of here's the whole thing, go take care of it. And so we'll work on those. Those are unique for us. We don't see a ton of them. So if we get that, make sure that we're just talking through that a little differently, because I need to know that when it comes in, so I make sure I monitor both sides of it to ensure you're protected. The PM office usually doesn't see anything until the contract's ready to start rolling. So the end date that we get sometimes will be from a PL for construction, because that's what goes in on their documents with their PS&E package. We have seen that, and we've seen that where I've gotten phone calls from the PM going, who set this end date? I don't know, you tell me, you guys came from Region. And so we've had that conversation. That's where we've realized, so to double check what's going in your PS&E package may impact how it's coming back around. We've talked a lot with James Seeley in the construction section to make sure that we're trying to cover that, but just to double check to make sure that what's in your PS&E package doesn't give any false information by accident, because it has happened. But I think we've got that fixed now. I haven't seen it we've been doing the end dates for almost 4.5 years, and I don't think I've seen that issue come up in the last 2. So I think we've got that gap filled, but just an awareness on your side of it is that when you're submitting your PS&E package, that somewhere in there, I think they took it off, but I'm not sure. I can't remember. So the STIP is our 4-year transportation improvement program. All of our federal funds, except one exception, which is the ER, have to be in the STIP, whether that is a planning project, design project, a program, transportation options, safe routes to school, different style of grantee style projects. They're all in the STIP. The STIP is a public facing document which is to stipulate what we intend to do and when. And it's supposed to line out, here's what the project looks like, here's where they are, the whole line on that. So basically it's kind of a preliminary checkbook as to what the intent is for us to deliver from a transportation perspective. All things considered, like what Mike Baker was saying earlier, transportation is very wide in just definition of what we have to do. Another point that I want to bring up with that, I'm glad you did, David, when you're setting your schedules and putting your dates together for your phases, I get phone calls from consulting and contracting firms asking for information going, can you send me all of your Region 1 PE for 2019? They're looking at that document because they're working on their end to figure out which project looks appetizing for them to go after. How many projects are going out to bid? David gets that, Larry McKinley gets that, I get that. Amanda gets those questions. We get those questions and we come back and say, oh, we have, and we've had it happen. Larry calls me up and says, I've got 60 projects going to bid in the next 7 months. I got 80. Uh-oh. So now he and I are talking to figure out where the 20 discrepancy is, to figure out, which leads to another thing. If you know you're slipping a phase, please slip it right away, so that we're actively managing the STIP so that folks, again, this is a full circle deal. We're not the only ones that use the document. Legislatures, Federal Partners, middle of January. Mac walked in, so I'm looking at him. Middle of January, we had that one request, right? I happened to be on the road that day too. That request turned into a little bit longer than I expected, and then it ended up being they wanted here's what's coming out in what years. And the legislative folks are asking. So we get it from every angle. So having the document up to speed as best we can. We recognize it's not always going to be there, but as best as you can, as soon as you know it, let's get that thing fixed, so that way we can make sure we've got the right info in there. One of my biggest concerns is always sending something out and then having somebody call me and go, this isn't right. Well, why isn't it right? This is what's in the STIP. Oh, we told people 2 months ago that one project's not going to go. That's always my concern when I'm running a report. You guys are the project leaders. You guys know for a fact there is nothing you can do, that construction phase is now moving from 20 to 21. That's the time you slip. Clarity on that? How's that help? And I completely hear you on that, because we have a handful of other efforts that are going on. I don't know how many of you have heard of the federal obligation matrix, but the region managers and the statewide programs have a report that I give, which is based on when we baseline how much money you say you're going to deliver that year. And then I have it how much you've actually obligated. And I can tell you from region experience how much I gained that for perspective to protect the region manager. starting to become a problem at the same time because we have a federal program to deliver and we have a House bill program to deliver, and we have to deliver both. And sometimes the conversation starts coming in of which one's going to give. Here's the kicker. As much pressure as we have to deliver House bill, Paul Mathers heard me say this, Max heard me say it 100 times, David's heard me say this, we don't have a choice but to deliver the federal side. We get redistribution every year, which means extra money we did not account for. We buffer in a little bit in our projections. Last year I got $52 million of extra money. But that's because we were able to obligate all of our federal funds. If we don't do that, previous year 33, previous year 37, previous year 28. We've gotten a good chunk of money because projects, the federal projects, have gone out the door on time. Or we've been able to buffer that. Mr. Leap's up in the back. You get to hear about him and have his speech here shortly. He's the one that taught me how to do this, of how to simply play the chess game about how to make this work. What we dealt with 5 years ago when I was learning from him is considerably different than what we're dealing with today because we're running out of the situation of having flexibility to deliver and get the federal aid done. Steve has pulled a lot of magic out of his hat over the years that he was in my role. The last couple years, I've been lucky. We've had enough coming. I haven't had to do that. This year, I'm going to end up figuring out something because I do have a situation where we're short. And so I'm going to have to figure out a little bit of a magic trick to figure that out. I've got those already in place. I know what we're going to be doing. However, to kind of put the emphasis on keeping project delivery moving, I agree with you. I'm not going to get on a soapbox here, but yes, my years in region, my years here now, we have a problem of just allowing things to slip and not being diligent to keep a schedule as tight as we probably should. I'll leave it at that.